a young mother separated from her newborn. A pregnant slave who risks her life, refusing to give up her faith. This is the disturbing story of two women whose lives and deaths represent one of the most powerful testimonies of determination recorded in ancient history. Today, we tell the true story of Perpetua and Felicitas, two mothers whose brutal execution in the arenas of Carthage shocked even the Romans, accustomed to violence. A story so impactful that its account, partly written by Perpetua herself, remains one of the earliest known texts written by a Christian woman. Vibia Perpetua was born into a noble Roman family around 180 AD in Thuburbo Minus, near Carthage, in the Roman province of Africa, modern Tunisia. Young, educated, and from a privileged background, Perpetua had everything a woman could desire in Roman society: status, wealth, and a secure future. Felicitas, on the other hand, was her domestic slave, living in the lowest stratum of Roman society. Property of another human being, without rights, without voice, and at that time, 8 months pregnant. How could these two women of such different circumstances end up sharing the same tragic fate? What could unite a Roman noblewoman and her slave in such a horrible death? The answer is simple, and at the same time extraordinary for the time. Both had converted to a forbidden religion, Christianity. In 203 AD, during the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, a new wave of persecution against Christians swept through North Africa. An imperial edict had expressly forbidden conversion to Judaism and Christianity, prescribing severe punishments for transgressors. It was in this context that Perpetua, at that time 22 years old and mother of an infant still nursing, was arrested along with other catechumens. Among them were Felicitas and 3 men, Revocatus, Saturninus, and Secundulus. What makes the story of Perpetua and Felicitas particularly remarkable is that much of it was recorded by Perpetua herself in a diary written in prison. An extraordinary document that survived as part of the text, known as the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas. In this first-person account, Perpetua describes her experiences from arrest to the moments that preceded her execution with surprising clarity and firmness of spirit. In the first days of prison, Perpetua faced not only the terror of Roman captivity, sadly known for its inhuman conditions, but also the anguish of being separated from her newborn child who was still breastfeeding. "I was tormented by concern for my child," she wrote. Her father, a devoted pagan, repeatedly visited her in prison, begging her to give up her faith for the good of the child. In a moving scene recorded by Perpetua, she writes, "He threw himself at my feet, tearing his beard and throwing himself to the ground with his face down, weeping against his years and pronouncing words such as to move any creature. But neither love for the child nor despair of her father managed to shake the determination of Perpetua. After days of torment, they finally allowed her child to stay with her in prison, which she described as divine grace. Suddenly the prison became a palace for me, so much so that I preferred to stay there rather than anywhere else." While Perpetua faced her torment, Felicitas was facing a different trial. In her 8th month of pregnancy, she feared that her execution would be postponed, as Roman law forbade the execution of pregnant women. In an irony of fate, she feared being separated from her martyr companions. According to the account, Felicitas went into premature labor just 2 days before the date set for execution. When a guard mocked her pain during delivery, asking how she would face the beasts if she couldn't even bear labor pains, Felicitas replied, "What I suffer now I suffer alone, but then another will be in me who will suffer for me, because I will also suffer for him." This is one of the most powerful moments in the story. The simplicity with which Felicitas expresses her faith in the presence of Christ during her own suffering. Felicitas's newborn, a daughter, was given to a Christian woman to be raised, as would be the child of Perpetua. The vigil of execution was marked by a traditional Roman ceremony, the Libera Cena, the last dinner offered to the condemned. The Christians transformed this moment into a celebration of faith, turning it into an agape feast. Witnesses say that Perpetua and her companions ate in public as if it were a party and not a prelude to death, addressing the crowd with statements on divine judgment and on the joy of martyrdom. This attitude of peaceful defiance and joy in the face of death confused the Romans, for whom life and social status were supreme values. On the morning of March 7th, 203 AD, games were held in honor of the birthday of the emperor's son, Gladiator. Perpetua, Felicitas, who had given birth just days earlier, and their companions were led to the amphitheater of Carthage. According to witnesses, they walked with radiant faces, not from fear, but from joy. Perpetua is described as following with a luminous gaze and a calm demeanor like the beloved of God, while Felicitas walked joyfully, having given birth in time to face the beasts with her companions. The prisoners were led into the arena. Initially, the men were to face a boar, a bear, and a leopard, while Perpetua and Felicitas were assigned to a wild cow, a particularly humiliating choice as the cow was a symbol of Juno, venerated by Roman women for fertility. Before the games, guards tried to force the prisoners to wear ritual garments. The men were to wear robes of the priests of Saturn, the women those of the priestesses of Ceres, pagan cults linked to imperial power. This was one last attempt to force them into a symbolic act of worship of Roman gods. Perpetua offered fierce resistance. "We came here of our own free will so that our freedom would not be violated. We gave our lives precisely to avoid doing such things." Struck by her courage, the tribune allowed them to face the beasts without ritual clothing. What followed was a demonstration of Roman cruelty at its most public expression. The men were exposed to the beasts and finally killed by gladiators. When the moment came for Perpetua and Felicitas, they were stripped and placed in nets to be exposed to a wild cow. Even the Roman crowd, accustomed to explicit violence, was shocked to see a mother who had just given birth with milk still dripping from her breasts, and a young noblewoman treated with such indignity. In a rare demonstration of public clemency, the crowd shouted that the women be taken back and dressed in loose tunics. Perpetua was the first to be attacked, thrown in the air by the cow and falling on her back. According to the account of a witness who completed her diary, she sat down and noticed that her tunic was torn on one side. She moved to cover her thigh, more concerned for her modesty than her pain. Then, seeing Felicitas thrown to the ground, Perpetua reached out her hand and lifted her up. The two remained side by side, surviving the first cycle of torture. The crowd asked that they be led to the gate of Sana Vivaria, where the gladiators awaited for the final blow. Perpetua, described as being in a trance, seemed not to realize what had happened and asked when they would be delivered to the cow. When told that she had already faced the animal, she did not believe it until she saw the marks on her body and her torn clothing. In the last moment, the condemned exchanged the kiss of peace, a significant ritual in which they greeted each other as equals before God, in stark contrast with Roman social stratification. Then they walked voluntarily toward the final encounter with the sword. The young man designated as executioner was a novice gladiator. His hand trembled. After a first failed blow that struck bone, causing her excruciating pain, Perpetua, in an extraordinary final act, guided the man's hand to her throat for the deadly blow. The account concludes, perhaps such a woman, feared by the unclean spirit, could not be killed unless she willed it herself. The story of Perpetua and Felicitas quickly became one of the most influential and venerated narratives in primitive Christianity. St. Augustine, who lived 2 centuries later in Carthage, held annual ceremonies on the anniversary of their martyrdom on March 7th, which became their liturgical feast day, a date still observed today in the Christian liturgical calendar. What makes the martyrdom of these 2 women so extraordinary? Perhaps it is the extraordinary overturning of social norms that they represent. In rigidly hierarchical Roman society, Perpetua, a noblewoman, and Felicitas, a slave, should have been separated by an insurmountable abyss. However, their shared faith united them in a brotherhood that transcended every social barrier, making them companions in the same struggle before God, the same destiny, and the same crown of martyrdom. Moreover, in a society in which women rarely had a voice or control over their own narratives, Perpetua not only chose her destiny against all family and social pressure, but also wrote her own story, leaving a document that has resonated for almost 2 millennia. Her diary is one of the first examples in Western history of a woman who speaks with her own voice, documenting her spiritual journey and her determination to face death. For the first Christian communities, often persecuted and socially marginalized, The story of Perpetua and Felicitas offered a powerful counterpoint to the imperial narrative. While Rome valued hierarchy, power, and conformism, these women exemplified equality, peaceful resistance, and spiritual freedom. The image of two mothers, a noblewoman and a slave, united in their determination and in their martyrdom, became a powerful symbol of a new social order based not on status, but on shared faith. The story of these two mothers also speaks of profound irony. In a society that valued women mainly as bearers of children and perpetuators of family lineage, Perpetua and Felicitas chose to abandon their newborns, not out of contempt for motherhood, but for loyalty toward a higher principle. This choice, perhaps the most difficult a mother can imagine, underscores the intensity of their conviction. Thus ends the earthly existence of two of the most extraordinary female figures of Christian antiquity. They did not die in comfortable beds surrounded by their families and their children, as would have been the natural fate of a Roman noblewoman, and what a slave might have hoped for if she survived the harshness of her condition. Instead, they died in public, united in their death as they had been in their faith, offering a testimony that challenged Roman notions of power, status, and even motherhood. Their history represents a disturbing inversion of expectations. The beasts destined to destroy their bodies ended up demolishing the invisible walls of hierarchy. The sword that ended their earthly lives made them immortal in memory, and the bodies of two fragile women thrown without ceremony into the arena of Carthage became the seeds of a spiritual revolution that would end up transforming the same empire that had tried to exterminate them. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. Share with those who love history. Thank you for listening. See you next time.